In this video from ITFreeTraining, I will look at NFS, or Network File System. Windows Server supports NFS sharing as well as a NFS client. This video will look at how to use both on Windows Server. There is a lot to NFS, and I cannot cover it all in one video. This video will provide you with the basics of how to get it up and running on your network. I will now change to my computer running Windows Server 2012 R2. First of all, I will open Server Manager from the Quick Launch bar. Once Server Manager has opened, I will next select the option Add Roles and Features to start the Add Roles and Features wizard. Since I will be installing the role on the local server, for the first two screens I will select the defaults. On the next screen, I will select the server NYDC1 from the list and move on. On the next screen, the NFS Server role needs to be selected. Later on in this video, I will look at the client component. On the Select Server Roles screen, I will expand File and Storage Services and File and iSCSI Services, and then select the component Server for NFS. When this component is selected, Windows may prompt you to install additional features. If this is the case, press the Add Features button when prompted. Once the component Server for NFS has been selected, I will press Next to move on. The next screen will ask if additional features need to be installed. In this case, there are no additional features to be installed, so I'll press Next to move on. Now that the required roles has been selected, on the last screen of the wizard, I will press Install to install the features. The role takes a minute or so to complete, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Once the install is complete, I will close the wizard and then open Windows Explorer. Next, I will open the D drive and create a folder called Data. This folder will be the folder that I will share using NFS. In the folder, I will create a text document called Data Folder on NYDC1.txt. So when I connect to it later on in the video using the client folder, I can identify it. Now that the folder has been created, the next step is to share it. To do this, I will right-click on the folder and select Properties. To share the folder using NFS, select the tab NFS Sharing. On the NFS Sharing tab, press the button Manage NFS Sharing to bring up the NFS Sharing properties. To share the folder, tick the option at the top, Share this folder. Once the folder is shared, there are some additional options that can be configured. It is beyond the scope of this video to go into these options. Notice at the top, there are options for Kerberos if you want to use Kerberos for security. In this case, I will select the option Allow Anonymous Access. This will allow the NFS share to be connected without a username and password. Next, I want to determine which computers will be able to connect to this NFS share. To do this, I will press the Permissions button. By default, you can see that all machines are Allow Read-Only Access to the share. To add additional permissions, I will press the Add button. In this case, I will add the computer NYDC1, which is this server. Later in the video, I will connect to this share from this computer and want to ensure that I have access when I do. Notice for the type of access, I can select Read-Only or Read-Write. In this case, I will leave it on Read-Write and exit to the previous dialog. Notice that if the permission All Machines is selected, the Remove button is grayed out. This permission cannot be removed, so if you want to remove the permission, you will need to change the access to No Access. Since I have added the other permissions, this essentially means that only this server will be able to access this NFS share. Now that the NFS share has been shared, I will now close all these windows and go back to Server Manager. The next step is to connect to the NFS share using Windows. To do this, an additional feature is required. Keep in mind that currently this feature is still available in Windows Server and earlier versions of Windows. However, in Windows 8.1, this feature has been removed, and thus with Windows 8.1, using the built-in software, you cannot access an NFS share. You will need additional software for Windows 8.1 to provide this. To add the feature, I will press Add Roles and Features. Since the feature will be installed on the local server, I will accept the default options and select this server when prompted. No additional roles need to be added, so I press Next on this screen. On the Features screen, I will select the feature Client for NFS. Once selected, I will complete the wizard and start the install. The install only takes a minute or so to complete, so I will pause the video and return shortly. Now that the install is complete, I will close the wizard and open Windows Explorer. To map to the NFS drive, I will right-click on this PC and select Map Network Drive. To map the drive, I can enter in the Windows share name of /NYDC1/data. This will work. However, I can also use the Unix standard of NYDC1:/data. Either will work fine. Notice that when I attempt to map the drive, I get an error message. The message tends to suggest the network share could not be found. However, I know that the problem is with the permissions. To fix this, I will go back to Windows Explorer, right-click on the folder, and open the properties. I will then select the NFS Sharing tab and press the button Manage NFS Sharing. From here, I will press the Permissions button. Once the Permissions dialog is opened, I will press the Add button and this time add the IP address of the server to the permissions list and make sure it has read-write access. If I now exit out of here, I can go back to Windows Explorer and this time I will be able to map the share. This is an important point to remember with NFS. Problems can sometimes occur when matching the computer or host name with the permissions list. As a quick fix, you can always use the IP address instead. Notice that when the drive is mapped, not all files are shown. This is another permissions problem. To fix this, I will go back to the properties of the folder and this time select the Security tab. In order to add additional permissions, I will press the Edit button and then press Add. I will then add the permissions Anonymous Logon. The Everyone permission is in the permission list. However, the Everyone permission does not include Anonymous Logon, which NFS has used in this case. I will now exit out of here and go back to the Windows Share. Notice that when I press the F5 key to refresh the view, the files will appear. The only file in this folder is the text file, but 4 other folders have appeared. These folders contain the data from the previous version feature of Windows. Normally in Windows, you will not see these folders, but with NFS Sharing, these folders appear. You can start to see why, if you connect one Windows system to another, you would just use SMB sharing to avoid problems like these. To prove a point, I will map another drive to the local C drive. Once the drive is mapped, I will right-click on the Start menu and select the option Command Prompt. Once the command prompt is open, I will run the command netuse. Notice that the drive I mapped using NFS is shown in standard Windows format. However, it is not using the Windows SMB protocol. As you can see on the far right, it is shown as NFS Network. In contrast to this, notice that the share above this is listed as Microsoft Windows Network. This means that one share is connected using NFS, while the other share is connected using SMB. I will now close these windows and go back to Server Manager, and next select File and Storage Services on the left-hand side. Once open, I will then select the option Shares. This shows all the shares that are currently configured on this server. If I right-click on the Data Share and select Properties, this will bring up the properties for the NFS share. Here you can configure the options for the share. The options are the same as before, but in a different interface, so I won't go through them again. However, I will select Share Permissions. In a moment, I will look at how to mount an NFS share in Linux, so I need to add the server's IP address to the permissions list. To do this, I will press Add and then add the IP address. Once I add the IP address and apply the changes, I will get a dialog message reminding me that I have enabled anonymous access to the share. This is fine for this demonstration, so I will ignore this message. The Windows server is now configured to allow my Linux server to mount a share from the Windows server using NFS. I will now change to my Linux server running Ubuntu to have a look at how to do this. First, I need to open a terminal to run the required commands. To do this, I will open the Start menu and select Xterm found under System Tools. First, I need to create a folder that the NFS share will be mounted to. To do this, I will run the command sudo make directory, followed by the path. In this case, I will create a folder called data under mount. The sudo command allows a command to be run as the root user. When I run the command, I will be prompted for the root password. The next step is to install the NFS software. This will allow the server to mount NFS shares and also share folders on the network using NFS. To do this, I will run sudo again, and this time run the command apt-get. This is the package software that this distribution of Linux uses to install and update software. In this case, I will use the install option followed by the name of the NFS package. Once I press Y to start the install, the NFS package will be installed and ready to be used. With the package installed, the next command is to mount the NFS share on Windows Server to the folder I created earlier. To do this, I will run sudo followed by the mount command. The mount command is used to mount a share to a folder. Following the mount command, I need to enter in where the share is located. In this case, it will be the IP address followed by :/data. Finally, I need to add the folder that the NFS share will be mounted to. Once the command is run, the NFS share will be mounted. I will now change to this folder and then run a directory listing. You can see the files shown are the same as those I could see on Windows when I mapped the drive. That is all you need to do for the client. The next part of the video, I will configure Linux to share a folder. First, I will create a folder to share by running two make directory commands to create the folder shared under export. Next, I need to change the permissions on the folder that I just created. To do this, I will run the command chmod followed by 777, which grants all access for all users on the folder I just created. Next, I need to modify a configuration file so that the folder will be shared using NFS. To do this, I will run pico followed by the configuration file called exports that is found under the etc folder. To share the folder, I need to add the file to the configuration file. After this, who has access, asterisk for everyone, followed by options, which in this case are RW for read and write. Once I have made the required changes, I will close and save the file. Now that the changes have been made, the last step is to start the NFS service. To do this, I will run the service command followed by the service name and the parameter start. The folder is now shared using NFS. I will now change to my Windows Server to look at how to map a drive to this NFS share. To map the drive, I will open Windows Explorer, right-click on this PC, and select the option Map Network Drive. For the path, I will enter in the IP address of the Linux server, followed by : and then the path of the share. Once I press Finish, the drive will be mapped. That's it for NFS on Windows Server. I hope this video helped give you a good understanding of how NFS works. If you'd like to see more of our videos, please check out our YouTube channel or webpage. Until the next video, thanks for watching.